Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined on Blogging Heads TV. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Joshua Cohen. Joshua, could you please introduce yourself?
I'm Joshua Cohen. I'm a writer, mostly a novelist, also write some nonfiction. I don't know.
I think that's good enough. But the main occasion for your appearance is you have a new novel that came out recently. The title is The Netanyahus, an account of a minor and ultimately even negligible episode in the history of a very famous family.
That is true.
So thank you for coming on to talk about it. And I feel like in some ways this novel is like aimed squarely at my like personal demographic for reasons we'll maybe get into. But what is sort of the elevator pitch summary of this novel?
Yeah, I like that. No, it's aimed for personal demographic. You know, nobody's writing novels for men these days.
It's true. It's true.
What is an elevator pitch of this thing? That's a bad elevator, man. That's not an elevator. That's an elevator stuck between floors or plummeting. It's essentially the story of Benzion Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu's father, who, for various reasons we can, get into or not, was kind of persona non grata in Palestine in pre-state Israel, and couldn't get a job there at the nascent Hebrew University, and kind of comes to the States and peddles himself around the adjunct circuit. He's a professor of history. He's a historian that specializes in the medieval period and specifically in the Inquisition. See, this elevator ride is already getting very long.
Yeah, but the other passengers have
they've all asphyxiated. So and he ends up applying for a job at this fictional college called Corbin College, where a professor of U.S. economic history of taxation studies named Reuben Blum is asked to kind of chaperone him, escort him around. And the real reason he's asked to do that is because, Benzion Netanyahu is one of his own, meaning that Reuben Blum is a Jew. He is the only Jew on the faculty. This is set in the winter of 1959, 1960, and Benzion Netanyahu shows up with his wife and his 3 kids in tow. Yoni, Bibi, and Ido, and his wife Tzila, and they proceed to kind of trash the place. This
novel is told from the perspective largely of a fictional character, Reuben Blum, but the events are based on things that actually happened, and Benzion or Benzion. I mean, did people in America call him Benzion, or did they always say Benzion?
I don't know. I mean, people call him everything. I don't know. They also call Reuben Blum Bloom. So I say Benzion Netanyahu, but so
the literal translation that would be son of Zion. And yes. that was Bibi Netanyahu's father, and he was a historian of medieval Iberia, and correct me if I'm saying anything that's incorrect, and he was very long-lived and lived to be like 100 or 101. He had 3 sons, one of whom later became prime minister of Israel and was the longest-serving prime minister in Israeli history, and only recently was, I guess while you're right, he was still prime minister and was just dislodged fairly recently.
I think that the book came out the week after the end of at least the end for now of Bibi's reign. Yeah, and his older brother Yoni Netanyahu was the hero of Entebbe. He was the single casualty on the Israeli side, a commando when they went to free the hostages of the Air France flight that was hijacked and brought to Uganda. And so he became, this happened in 1976. So his older brother sort of became this national hero, this martyr, this kind of symbol of Israeli sacrifice and daring, their willingness to kind of go anywhere and do anything to save their own. And then the third son, Ido, who radiologist and a playwright, lived in upstate New York for a while.
Okay, and so the novel is set in Corbin College in Corbindale, New York, which seems to bear some resemblance to Ithaca, New York, and Cornell University. Though it seems to be more westerly in Western New York than
it's Ithaca. More Chautauqua County. I mean, I have to say that I love the all of these not all of these. It's flattering, but these reviews that were this could not have happened at Cornell in this year and and I never said it happened at Cornell. I never said Corbin.
In fact, it never, you never said it really happened at all because it's a novel, and
right. And well, I didn't want to write any specific place, and certainly if given the choice between writing New Haven and writing Ithaca, I would much prefer, to me, Ithaca's exotic. New Haven is something a little bit closer to what I'm used to. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah. So, where should we go with this? Well, so the book is dedicated to Harold Bloom, the renowned literary critic who passed away just a couple of years ago, and you talk at the end that the novel was inspired by an anecdote that the actual Harold Bloom, who was a friend of yours and an admirer of yours, described to you. But your main character's name or narrator's name is Blum, not Bloom, and he's not a literary theorist and English professor who could recite reams of romantic poetry by memory. He's a economic historian and studies taxation and an Americanist. So how did you decide that to combine real historical figures with fictionalized characters, and that this was the story to tell?
Right. I mean, I don't think that I could have written Harold Bloom. I think that, first of all, there's the issue of having Benzion Netanyahu, who is already severe and an enormous figure, right, on the page, and to put Harold there also, or a version of Harold, there would be no air in the room. And also writing Harold, it would seem, that I would be making all of it up, because he was so larger than life. He was literally incredible. He did not, his talents were freakish in a way. And his talents of recall, his memory, his associative capacities, he truly was an instance of truth being stranger than fiction. And I wouldn't have, sort of dared to put it on the page. That said, there are versions of Harold here. One of the things that I really thought about was his influence theory, right? The anxiety of influence, which is probably his, let's say most famous idea about, how does a writer find their voice? A writer is always reacting, an artist is always reacting to influence to previous generations, but more specifically to a misreading or misinterpretation of previous generations, whether a conscious misreading, or an unconscious misreading. And the idea of, a real writer's voice is born from that encounter. And that entire idea about the past and about what is owed and what is owed to influence, what is owed to tradition, I really wanted to bring into the book through in some way. And I feel like I did that through the taxation studies, the idea of, what do we owe? What is owed?
Mhm.
That was a small amount of tribute there.
Mhm. So Ruben Blum is not Harold Bloom, but you obviously are playing with a sort of, metafictional line or something, and so you decided to name him Blum instead of Bloom, and he shares some aspects of the actual Harold Bloom's biography, at least in the vaguest outlines of being born in the Bronx and being raised in the sort of ultra orthodox family, and then
No,
leaving.
he wasn't raised. I mean, he was raised, Yiddish speaking, Odessan garment cutters.
Okay, well, but wasn't he? Oh, okay, well, you obviously knew him personally.
Yeah,
He but his first language was Yiddish, and
sure.
it was, I mean, he was, the way I've heard him, I remember him saying at some point, or being quoted as saying that, he was expected to like become a grand rabbi someday, and he thought he must have had like a great rabbi in his lineage, that's how he was able to
no, absolutely.
memorize these these huge portions of English literature, because like the Hebrew memorization was like part of studying the Talmud or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just pushing back against the ultra orthodox thing. I mean, I think that he was raised, I think, traditionally. I mean, the idea that these distinctions, these current distinctions that we use, which in Israel are political distinctions, and here are, I don't even know what kind of distinctions they are anymore in America, to denominate observance. They didn't apply, or they applied very differently. I think in Harold's Milieu.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but why did you? So you could have, not named your character Blum. So you're playing with us in some respects. So can you talk about why you kept certain aspects of the biography or the personality, but changed others?
Yeah, because I don't, it's fun. It's amazing how much, to me, how put off people are by it, or how people seem it's something new, or it's somehow invasive, or it's somehow unfair, right? To make an incursion upon the quote unquote historical record with a bit of imagination. I mean, to me, these are very basic, it's a very basic technique. I mean, and the answer is because, the world as it is never the world that you want it to be. So you end up writing books to change that, because it's the only way in which that can happen. Right. I mean, or at least when you become as, depressed and apathetic in your ability to change the real world, as or the physical world, as I have. I think that there's a recanalization of the energy into the book, yeah. I mean, I think that the flow between what is real and what is imagined is so unimpeded, is so natural in other parts of our lives today. And yet when it comes to books, where actually that should be something deeply native to the form, people pause for a moment and say, wow, that's strange. They don't have as much of a problem with the real and the fictional interpenetrating in their politics, or on their TV, that they take that for granted. That's par for the course. That we're used to seeing that, but seeing that in a book makes people say, the author's really playing with things here.
Yes, I mean, it seems to me that fiction and dream world and reality television, which is we all know is not reality, of all merged in more ways than perhaps they did in the past couple of years. But okay, so if you had told me, if someone had handed me this book and said, we opened up the Philip Roth archive and we found a draft of this book in here, and this was the one he never published or something, I think I would have maybe bought it. You reviewed the Blake Bailey biography of Roth before the sexual assault allegations came out, and you did it in Roth's voice, if I'm remembering correctly. And and this novel reminded me of Operation Shylock and some of Roth's other work where he is playing with metafiction and real life and not real life. And then the other writer this somewhat reminded me of, or another sort of ghost I felt haunting the book, was Nabokov, and maybe that's because of the Ithaca stuff. And you have some like supposed real texts in here that they're printed verbatim, but like a letter that an academic sends saying that Bibi Netanyahu should not be hired because he's a horrible person. Right. And could you talk about so we're talking about anxiety of influence. Am I correct in seeing these traces of these two other previous writers here?
I stole this book from Roth's archive. I broke in and they were like, just don't touch anything in that pile, and I shoved it in my bag. Sure. I mean, I purposefully, I think I overlarded this book with references and allusions and tags and colors here and there, from Roth, from, to a lesser degree, Bellow and Malamud, but the kind of post-war, now we can look back, golden age of Jewish writing. Like, this was obviously an attempt to kind of do a, to make some sort of, as they, a tzimis out of them, right? Like, to make a kind of, you want to
define tzimis for viewers, listeners who aren't familiar?
It's what you eat so you can go to the bathroom. It's like a stew of like stewed fruits. It's a mess. But the idea was to kind of put into this one pot, all of these sort of elements from sort of the heyday of Jewish American culture, along with, frankly, and sure, there's some Panin in there, and I mean that's kind of unavoidable when we're doing Ithaca. But really, what I was thinking about was the kind of what we can look back on now is a certain golden age of Jewish writing, but really about a certain kind of golden age of Jewish assimilation into American popular culture. And so I was thinking a lot about the nascent sitcom. And the sort of early teleplays and sitcoms that were largely written by Jews, and what were those forms? How could I incorporate sort of those rhythms and those forms into my book? I was thinking all the time of sitcom houses, right? Are they're very Jewish houses because everyone's always barging into a door, and like, there's no privacy. Like, everyone is always kind of screaming at each other, like they only have, kind of two modes. It's the loud and the louder. But really it's that sense of, you live with, your family, right? Or with, friends who are your family, who can open the door at any time, who can surprise you in the bathroom, who can surprise you in your bed, who are enmeshed in every aspect of your life and know every piece of your business. I think it was the aesthetics of the sitcom and of the teleplay, let's say, for that I which should be the sitcom before it was called the sitcom, that I was thinking of, and essentially to make a book then that was made of these forms, that was made out of these, I think, Jewish signifiers.
That's interesting. That, I mean, saying that clarifies certain scenes, and there are, especially when the Netanyahu family and the crazy children come in, it enters sort of a madcap.
Well, I mean, yeah. I also, and I should say something about Jewish forms too, because that sounds good, but what does it mean, right? And I think there's this, there's an idea through Yiddish literature that that it wasn't possible to truly write a Jewish national epic, right? In the same way that to read Tolstoy is to understand Russia, right? Victor Hugo, you will understand France, right? And there's the German idea of the national poet, the Nationaldichter, right? Who Goethe is the soul of Germany, right? And so, what are these? What is the Jewish equivalent of a national epic or a national poet or national writer? And because dealing with Jews living in many different lands, also writing in many different languages, including different Jewish languages, and not necessarily ever having a representative epic outside of, I don't know, Torah, right?
Yeah, that was, the epic of Exodus.
Exactly, but no one that is, let's say, produced by man, right? And so there is this interesting aversion to epic forms in a lot of Yiddish writing, and the form that seems to be the most, let's say, nationally representative, especially in the Yiddish, in let's say the heyday of Yiddish literature, is the anecdote, right? It's the anecdote really being the documentation of the folk tale, the writing down of the humorous story. This is where I think Yiddish literature reached its perfect form. Something like Shalom Aleichem, for example, right? I mean, this is not a controversial opinion to say Shalom Aleichem is a kind of a highlight of Yiddish literature. But I do think that when you ask what are those stories, what are Peretz stories, for example, this idea of the anecdote where something that is oral or something that was transmitted orally is written down. It almost has the same structure as a joke where a situation is prolonged till a single climax, right? Or a punchline. And that was a very kind of specific form that I was thinking of and wanted to incorporate also in the book. So I feel like there's there are elements of that.
You mentioned assimilation, and that's one of the major themes. And I guess one of the ways this sort of reminded me of Roth was you have sort of characters who are not representative, but they are coming from opposing perspectives, and there's a clash. And often in Roth there wouldn't necessarily be a sort of moral wrapping up of whose perspective was correct or something, but the characters are coming up against each other and both like sort of giving the best case for what they think. And so, and can you talk about the historical Netanyahu's the father's research into the medieval Spain and Portugal and the conversos and all this other stuff, and why versus the assimilationism of mid-century American Jews, and how did you? It's a very interesting theme, and obviously something that Jews continue to argue about today. Can you talk more about how you brought that in?
I mean, I think the primary let's say antagonism or debate in the book is between an assimilationist but liberal humanist, let's say, idea, and Ben-Zion Netanyahu's, which is a hardline identitarian idea, right? To my mind, it's always ironic that a lot of the things that Ben-Zion Netanyahu said, and this is a man pretty far on the right, almost as far on the right as you can get at some points in his life, espoused certain identity-based ideas that I wanted to show that today were reflected in the left. But no, this was Ben-Zion Netanyahu was a person who believed that in the Amalekite idea of Jewish history, that the Jews were never safe and never would be safe unless they had their own country with their own ability to defend themselves. He mistrusted through a study of history, what he learned was that history was a cycle of repressions, murders, betrayals, pogroms. He did not think that there was a room for Jewish life in a diaspora. And then once the State of Israel was founded, it sort of, the State of Israel almost obviated the need for any other countries because all Jews should make Aliyah, and this for him was a political, let's say, replacement for messianism, right? Like Israel was the translation into political terms of the Jewish messianic ideal. And Reuben Blum's a liberal, which I mean, in certain circles can be seen as a dirty word these days, and certainly has taken its own kind of Clintonian hits. But what I mean by that is, he sort of takes all comers, and he also expects from his guests, from his guests who become his really antagonists, that they will play fair in a way. So he has that also naivete of the liberal that we're all rational actors attempting to broker compromise to the benefit of all. And Ben-Zion Netanyahu comes in his house and, can we eat your food? Sure. Can we drink your drinks? Sure. Can your daughter babysit, my sons? Sure. Can my wife borrow your wife's clothes? Sure. Can my eldest son fuck your daughter? Sure. And it's this liberal thing of giving and giving and giving and giving and giving and never knowing where to stop, or being anxious to the point of stasis about where to draw your own hard line. Because at that moment, liberalism takes on a different face. And so I wanted to show truly that conflict, the liberal humanist meeting the right-wing ideologue, and trying to understand each critiques of the other.
So one of the, as you present,
and in that, sorry, I didn't want to say one other thing.
Go ahead.
And in that way, Ben Zion's true, his scholarship, because you were mentioning medieval Iberia and the Inquisition, that all, in that conflict in the book, I think that Ben Zion's scholarly interest in the 15th century and the Inquisitions really is revealed as not necessarily a responsible career in history, but as an attempt to marshal evidence for a justification of Jewish autonomy in Israel. Mm-hmm. Saying, I've done the research of what our history is in exile, what our history is in Galut. Here is the case stated. In a lot of ways, I think his career was an attempt to piece together an intellectual history that can also serve as a justificatory framework for the modern state of Israel.
So as you present his research, it's sort of like a rebuttal of assimilationism, because in medieval Iberia, there were a number of Jews who converted to Catholicism, and they, I guess, and please, again, correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong. So they were sort of called the conversos, but then generation to generation, they essentially seemingly were just regular Catholics within society. And then the Inquisition was a way to sort of, peel back the layers of assimilation and say, oh, these people, they were just Jews all along, even if their great-grandparents were the ones who converted and they had lived as Roman Catholics, for generations. And so
yes, Yeah.
assimilationism is ultimately always going to fail because to the non-Jew, like the Jew is always the Jew. Is this an accurate summary?
I mean, it's accurate for our purposes. Yeah. I mean, I think, I mean, I look at it a little bit differently. I don't, I mean, it's interesting to look at it through the assimilationist lens, which is, I guess, isn't interesting, which is the lens that in American, that American Jewry, I guess, would be most comfortable looking at this, like looking at his ideas through. I see it more as and I believe Bibi Netanyahu did as well himself. His research was playing with the moment that truly racialized Judaism. So the idea is, you're a converso, or you're a Catholic, you're second generation Catholic, you're third, right, you're third generation Catholic, and maybe you married other Jews who have converted to Catholicism, right? But here's news for you. What you were was not a faith. What you were was a race, and the blood is the thing that damns you. And it was, in a sense, the racialization of Jewry, or the acknowledgement of the racialization of Judaism, or the entrenchment of the racialization of Judaism as a criteria that is interesting, that is in some way useful to non-Jews, right? That draws the line in Bibi Netanyahu's work between the 15th century and the Nuremberg laws, right? This idea that there was a certain quantum of blood that would taint you, and I was particularly interested in the racialization argument. I mean, certainly there's an enormous part of the book. I also enjoy when people point out anachronisms in the book that, they wouldn't have had an argument like that about woke culture in 1960. And I was, yes, no, thank you. I appreciate it. I swear. I was interested in kind of digging into that element of it, the racialization element, the tension between the people and the religion.
And so a character I don't think we've mentioned yet is Reuben's daughter, Judith, who I guess is sort of an American, an American Jew who wants to maybe assimilate more, and what she wants to do is get a nose job. And various comic scenes or / tragic scenes go on from that, but it is, I guess, so that is the, I don't know, more contemporary version. And did Brenda Potemkin in Go Back Columbus, did she have a nose job? I can't remember.
Yes, I believe she did.
I think she did. Okay, so so this is a theme. The Jewish woman wanting to get a nose job is a theme of American Jewish literature for a while.
Sure, and that's why, I mean, and I don't want to give it away, but I mean, being very aware that I was, indulging a cliche, I wanted to do it in a very specific way, and so I think her nose job is certainly not a Rothian nose job.
No, although, I don't want to spoil anything, but the way this plot line plays out, it was surprising and entertaining. But yeah, I mean the debate about assimilation, continues to this day. It's maybe today in America it's more about intermarriage, and then in, I guess, in Israel, this is, I guess maybe for an earlier generation, the idea was that, this is the place where you don't have to assimilate because this is the Jewish state. And
no, I mean, I think that there was an enormous there still is an enormous assimilationist impulse in Israel. But I mean, that was the foundation of the Zionist project. It was turning, city dwellers whose jobs were essentially to be merchants, and to work in commerce or something, something mercantile, to turn them into farmers, to turn them into people of the land. I mean, that was, in fact, if you broaden your idea of what assimilationist means, it is, it's to create a new, active, physical Jew, a dangerous Jew as well. And so, though it wasn't the assimilation that we're thinking about, which is to a dominant culture, which is something that came into Jewish life through, living under the Greeks, living under the Romans, the idea that, one can't lose oneself in this host culture, right? I certainly understand the differences between that and the self-willed project of recreation, of self-recreation, with the early Zionist movements. But at the same time, there are similar desires at work. There are similar energies at work. I mean, that's kind of what I think I got at that in the book, or I tried to get at that in the book, where I said, no matter where you were at this time, if you were a Jew, you were in the process of becoming someone else.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's very well said. And so, transitioning to another idea that's in the novel, is the idea of revisionist Zionism. And so the actual Netanyahu was what was his relation to this figure Zeb Jabotinsky? He was the secretary?
I don't know. I keep on seeing the secretary almost like because of the, like he's typing or something or answering phones. I don't. After he was unable to secure a position at Hebrew University, he became a representative of Jabotinsky's New Zionist organization in New York, and essentially he edited or wrote for, like he did, he wrote for a number of revisionist periodicals in pre-state.
Can you? So I think so. I did an episode a couple months ago about sort of millennial Judaism, and I talked about how I felt my education in especially my Hebrew school education, was sort of like deficient in a number of ways, and they didn't really teach us about the things that are like actually happening. They give us sort of the mythologized version. So revisionist Zionism, I'm sort of still, I don't know all these the different forces and different versions of Zionism that were contending with each other before the founding of Israel. So can you talk a little more about that? And I'm sure many in the audience are also not sure what revisionist Zionism is.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I hope by this point in the discussion we have an audience, but let's do it, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that there's still a couple non-Jews listening to this, but but even like I said, like I said, the version of the founding of the state of Israel that I was taught as a 11-year-old was not the one that was talking about the contending, forces of different strains within the diaspora, like debate about Zionism.
I mean, I think the revisionist Zionist movement is, I think, probably best encapsulated by the idea that Jewish self-determination comes from Jewish action, and that unlike the liberal labor Zionists or the socialist labor Zionists, however you want to kind of define what was at the time a number of different blocks. There was a dominant cohort that saw that the only way toward Jewish autonomy was to get Britain behind it, to certainly to get American approval. And the revisionist Zionists didn't think that the Jews should wait for the great powers of the world to grant them a country. They thought that they should go and take it. And that's the difference. And the difference is Jews who saw a way through statecraft to the creation of the Jewish state, and Jews who who would deal with the statecraft later, but for them it was a matter of self-activated, let's say, autonomy. And I want to say also the revisionist Zionism was deeply bound up with the Holocaust, because the reason why Jews needed to get a state now and didn't have to wait around for Britain to say, okay, you can have one now, or for for the Americans to agree with the British, okay, give them one, was because of the imminent emergency of European Jewry. And it was Jabotinsky who would travel throughout Europe in the eve of the Holocaust in the late 30s, who would warn that unless there was this free Jewish emigration to Palestine, all of these people would die. And he turned out, of course, to have been correct. And he viewed the Zionists, again, many other blocks, but the non-revisionist Zionists, right, who were people who were very much more in favor of negotiation, he viewed them, I think, as accommodationists and as with some blood on their hands. That said, there were certainly people farther to the right than Jabotinsky. There was, the Stern Gang, for example. People who were truly engaged in daily, regular terrorist activities in order to secure a Jewish state. And Jabotinsky, I shared their urgency, but not their methods.
Okay, so maybe the one strain of Zionism, which perhaps was the dominant one, was more sort of a.
Well, it certainly was the dominant one. I mean, revisionist Zionism was essentially banished from the state. I mean, Jabotinsky was made persona non grata in Mandatory Palestine, and he was not allowed back into the country by the British. And when he died in upstate New York, at a Beitar training camp, basically, had a heart attack. He was buried in Long Island, and his body was not allowed to be brought back to the Jewish state. It really, the revisionists were out of favor and were seen as troublemakers at best and terrorists at worst by many in Israel. You only see their influence coming back, really the time of Begin and later, and Shamir and Bibi represents, without a doubt, the sort of return of the repressed. He was the ultimate triumph of the revisionist ideology.
Okay, so we can say the revisionist ideology was the intellectual grandfather of the Likud politics that Netanyahu practiced.
Of Bibiism, which is this idea that if revisionist Zionism said we need this country because the Jews are dying, or they will die because this is an existential threat, it's a kind of a clear and present danger in that way. Bibi's version of it is the existential threat is constant. The threat of imminent death surrounds us, and only I can save you.
Right. And so, and tell me if this sounds right or wrong to you. In some ways, the division also is sort of the polite Jew versus the rude Jew. And the insider game of trying to get a Jewish state through the British, the mandate, or maybe that's probably not the right word because there was a British mandate, but the British Foreign Secretary declaring, okay, this is now the land for the Jews, versus a sort of direct action, violent, possibly terroristic or definitely terroristic, sort of outside game of using violence to do it. And then Ruben Blum certainly seems like a polite person who's trying to treat everyone nicely, and the Netanyahus, or as you usually term them, the Yahoos, this family of sort of crazy Knicks or something. They're just going nuts and sort of tearing shit up. And so it's an entertaining clash. So I feel like I'm doing somewhat of a disservice to the novel by not emphasizing that it is very funny in various places, and it is not. It's some way a novel of ideas, but there's comic parts that remind me of Roth once again, and it's not about primarily debates in 1920 Europe. It is about these characters who are smashing up against each other. So I do want to say that. And so let's talk just a little bit more about the children and how you decide to portray them. And they are like 13, 10, and 7 or something, the three Netanyahu boys who run riot over the pleasant household of the Blum family. And I think you have the first line that young Bibi says. I think he says, "We're not idiots," when the parents are trying to spell out the word cookie or something, because they think maybe they don't understand. And you have a lot of, body humor involved in this. So how did you, is this an accurate representation of what the young Netanyahu boys were like, or how did you decide to portray these characters this way?
How do I know what the young Netanyahu boys were like? No, I think it comes from watching a lot of Three Stooges. Frankly, there's something about that trio, that's so, I don't know, that's so deep in comedy, at least a comedy that I remember watching on like late night TV when they kind of didn't know what to put on. And so you would see like the many generations of the Stooges. You'd be like, oh, that's not the same. Those aren't the same Stooges.
Right, there were Shemp and other ones that sort of faded away.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know. I was thinking about the dynamics. I mean, I have a brother, and 3 boys in a house is it's a lot of boy, and especially in that age range, and no, I wanted to just have this sense of shamelessness. I think it's one thing that I always, my brother has children, and and so I'm their uncle, and I always remember, when someone would call our former president, who I like talking about him as if he's dead, our former president, when someone would say that he was shameless, right, or acted like a child, I would always think of my nephew, because it's that same sort of, I'm just going to say anything that pops into my head, and I'm going to do anything I want to do. And then when I'm called out about it, I'm just going to lie, and I'm going to lie and lie and lie and lie. And it's that behavior. It's can I have a cookie? No. Then they take the cookie and like break everything while they, go and get it themselves. And did you take a cookie? No. And it's that shamelessness of childhood that doesn't in some way ever recede and finds its way into adulthood with far more dangerous consequences than cookie filching. And so I wanted to kind of show childhood tyranny
Mm-hmm.
and shamelessness. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Shameless is definitely I think Ezra Klein clipped at one point that Trump's superpower was shamelessness, whereas there are just norms that other national figures wouldn't break,
Well,
and
right,
he was fine with it.
but it's like the superpower of every child is shamelessness. And in a way, with the child, you're not really sure where that, the lies that come with that, the shameless lies or the shameless tantrums, how much they are controllable, right? Or what is the best way in which you could teach a child to put them under control, to get control of them. I think that his younger brother, who has to wear a diaper for car trips, when his mother's changing him, Bibi reaches over just to flick his penis. And, that to me is in that gesture, I think that everything is contained.
Yeah, I mean, the cruelty for its own sake is, and Adam Serwer recently published an edited collection titled "The Cruelty Is the Point" or "What's the Point," and that I think that was a phrase he came up with that resonated with a lot of people about the Trump era. Let me see. Oh, so there's one character we haven't discussed that much, and that is Sila. Is that how you pronounce it? Benzion Netanyahu's wife, who I knew practically nothing about, as a real historical figure. And how did you envision her and her role, especially and her relation to Edith? Is that right? Who is Reuben's wife?
I think Sila is Sila. I mean, she's the only person who can tame Benzion Netanyahu, right? I mean, that's and she wants to talk about a different view, let's say, of Israel or of the land, right? She's married to a man who lives in sort of a metaphor become real, a dream become real, right? The idea of a return to Zion, and suddenly it is now something that is real and around us and has an army and essential services and schools, and her her existence is saying, great, I'm glad the dream has been achieved. What about air conditioning and disposable diapers? And this idea of kind of wanting progress, wanting bounty, wanting this American 50s and early 60s kind of consumer idyll. And I think Edith is sort of the opposite, because Edith, of course, is born in the middle of it, American. I think that she is, a frustrated librarian, a frustrated books person, and maybe even more than her husband, wants to retreat from ideological certainty. And I think of her as just someone who wants to be left alone so she can read. I feel very kind of close to her because of that. It's like when everyone else is fighting and doing, you have the idea that, she just kind of wants to go into a corner and just, whatever mothers do in dark corners, I assume read.
A minor part of the novel that I enjoyed a lot was sort of the interactions between Reuben and Edith when all the craziness is happening around them. And it seemed to me like this is a portrayal of a good marriage. And even though this crazy thing's happening and everyone is stressed out and she's really mad at him for inviting these nutsos into the house. But it seemed like they were like, okay, we're not happy. I'm not happy with this, but we're going to somehow get through this together. And that struck me.
Yeah, and I think that also what binds them almost perversely is a kind of inability to communicate with their daughter. I think that they were very much like a couple who, because of the gulf between themselves and their daughter, have been brought closer together, which I also think is an odd type of intimacy, to be brought closer to a spouse because of your distance from your child.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Well, I guess I teased it before. I should just say the reason I feel like this book was aimed squarely at me. Aside, Roth is one of my favorite authors. I've discussed him on the show before. I lived in Ithaca, New York for 4 or 5 years when my ex was in grad school at Cornell. So I experienced a number of Central Western New York winters, which you portray in a very, a way that made my, sent a chill down my spine, thinking about all those trudging through the snow and it piling up on you. And I, so I took a class from Harold Bloom in college. I was only auditing it, but so I saw the man himself, and he certainly was a singular figure. And I couldn't, there was a picture. So I'm trying to remember if I have this correctly. There was a story in that the Yale Alumni magazine did about Marie Boroff, who was the first woman who got tenure in the English department at Yale. I believe I have this right. And so they printed a picture that was like the faculty, yearbook photo kind of thing from like 1959. And there were 2 people who stood out from this crowd. One is Marie Boroff, the only woman, and the other is young Harold Bloom, who just, everyone else is this like waspy, type, and he just looks so different. And it's I think they even pointed out like who he was in this photo because, he's one of the only other people who remember from the Yale English department faculty of 1959 or something. But yeah, so so there were a number of reasons why I was like, wow, this novel is speaking to me. And so obviously not everyone's going to have that, but if they're somehow still listening to this, they should probably read this book because there's even more in there that we haven't touched on. And it's comic. It is a novel of ideas that has a historical perspective and speaks, with a lot of knowledge about Jewish history. But even if you maybe don't care about all that stuff, you probably will just enjoy the comic misadventures of these characters. So I appreciate the book and I appreciate you coming on. Is there anything? I feel like we've gone on for a while. Is there anything else you want to?
No, this has been fun. This has been nice. I just, what is it? Everything I've done for this book has been online, and we have to start being in person again.
Well, this is a book that if someone else has, if you've read this book and someone else has read this book, you probably will want to talk about it with them.
Right. Right.
So
you might want to date them. You might want to marry them. Or just sleep with them. You might want something.
Or you might want to run away.
That can only be done in person.
You might want to run away from them or something. Right. Escape the swirl of Jewish history bearing down on many of us. Okay, so the links to the book where you can find it will be below, and to your personal site. Is there anything else? Are you a social media person or not particularly?
No, I can't do it.
Okay, well that is wise, and
or I don't. Is it? I don't know, but yeah, I get to my grandmother. Yeah, I get too heated.
Well, that is something that can make one flourish on Twitter and other such spaces, but for the personal and internal health, it's probably not a good thing. So staying away makes sense. Okay, so people should check out the book. Do you want to hold it up? So the copy I have has a different cover than the one that you have, but the actual copy, you can see it there, and you can see the snows of Central Western New York there. Okay, so Joshua, thank you for coming on. People should check out the book. Once again, the Netanyahus, kind of a minor and ultimately even negligible episode of the history of a very famous family. People can rate, they can review, they can do whatever they want. But thanks for listening, and I'll see you again next time.
Thank you. Take care.